Hello everyone, it's good to be back with you today. I don't have any announcements as of yet. Just 2 weeks we will be back together, and we do need a few volunteers for some things. So if you want to get a hold of me for that, I know Andre needs some help with food. We may have someone for the sound booth, and just making that once a month meeting just something good for the community, where the community a lot of times just doesn't understand our love for one another. They don't understand our patience for one another. They don't understand that, so much about it. And so that it's a spot where we can maybe make that Tuesday night, and I don't know, just thinking aloud, that Tuesday night is an evangelistic piece, maybe, where we continue on with what we are learning, but also making it palpable for the community, that they're like, wow, this has some value to it. I want to know why. I want to investigate more. So, yeah, we're looking for all sorts of things to make that more impactful, not only to us, for sure to us, not that it be a self-seeking thing or just for our little group, but that it also reach out past the doors and into those who really need to hear what we're hearing all the time as well. Because what we're learning tonight, what we have been learning about, dating, courting, how to be single, marriages, the rest of the world doesn't understand this. And so today we're going to learn about the first part of chapter 6 in Fighting Fair. And I'm just going to jump right in. Again, hopefully you guys have prayed or you will pray after this. Either way, that we do bathe our groups in prayer. There's always a dynamic when the invitation of the Holy Spirit is given. The group always, at least all the ones that I've been a part of, always change. So I'm going to jump right in. So today we're learning how to fight fair. One thing that I've personally learned in fighting fair, that fights are not always fair. That's just what I've learned. Sometimes in order for a fight to be fair, someone has to take or receive undesirable moves or words. Basically, either my wife or myself needs to humble ourselves in order for the fight to be fair. So there's like an unfairness a lot of times that needs to happen for the fight to become fair. And that's generally where most fights fail. Next week we got a list. List next week is so good, I'm considering of sending it out to each person in the group, just printing out a ton of them. I really enjoyed it as I studied for next week's. But Pastor Matt was asked the question from one of his mentors, and the mentor said, "Brother, you're going to fight with someone for the rest of your life. Do you want it to be Lauren? Whoever you marry, you're going to fight with. If it's not with Lauren, it'll be with someone else." And that is the question we all must ask ourselves. Who do you want to fight with for the rest of your life? Because there's just going to be conflicts. Think about friendships, relationships you've had, aunts, uncles, cousins, relatives, people down the street. I mean, there's always people talking about these conflicts. The one we consider we're always going to fight with is our spouse. Like, this is just, and they're just in our house all the time. And it's their house too, right? But it's just like it's our home. And my brother said something after he got being married for 6 weeks. He just said, "I had this realization." And I said, "What's that?" "She's never going home." And it always made me chuckle because that's her home. And I don't know if he didn't think that or it was an oversight, but they're always going to be around. Your spouse is always going to be there. So that's it. It's who do you want to fight with? Who do you want to go through the issues of life with? So this shouldn't just be a negative thing, like it could be sounded negative like I was just saying, but it could also be very refreshing and encouraging because you'll start to learn that person. You'll start to get an understanding of them. We will always be a broken people. We're never going to be perfect, neither will our spouse. In the book Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas, he says, "What if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy?" Think about that. I want you to ponder that for a moment. What if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? The honesty and genuineness of this statement carries a lot of weight, and I want you to think on it. Conflict is going to be a part of every relationship, every friendship, even the healthiest, most godly relationships or marriages. So we're always going to struggle with being self-centered and destined for conflict. Like, that's going to be your struggle. That's going to be my struggle. Self-centered and conflict. We need the Holy Spirit to help us with our sanctification, meaning to be molded more into His image, walking away from sin. So conflict is a part of life. So the ones that we love and choose to love for a time, there will be long suffering. You will suffer long. With the longer you're in someone's life, there will be long suffering, but there also will be more understanding, insight, revelation, like you're growing with that individual, whatever level the relationship is. So let's jump in to the very first point. The roots of conflict. Number one, unmet expectation. 20% of the Song of Solomon, it covers conflict. Generally, the people who don't think there will be conflict are those who are just dating and are engaged. They're not married, they've never been married, and they just think there'll never be conflict. They will be the exception, and it's so awesome to listen to. It's like literally like it's like a fantasy book. They're just like writing this fantasy novel, and they're fun. It's fun. It's like they're so naive, you know. How will they navigate it all? They're gonna tell you, and why it won't happen to them. They're gonna let you know. You're like, yeah, like they probably, you know, they watch lots of fantasy videos, and who knows. But it's a great idea for them to have in their lives until reality smacks them. Song of Solomon 5:2-3 says, "I slept, but my heart was awake. A sound, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one, for my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of night." So we read Solomon was out all day, possibly in the rain, possibly sweating, but he's been out or out all day. Either way, he got home late and his wife was in bed. Verse 3, "And put on my garment. How could I put it on? I had bathed my feet. How could I soil them?" So it appears in the next text that Solomon was thinking about being home, was finally excited to arrive. He was expecting a big kiss. The smell of food waiting arrived, maybe wanting to snuggle. You know, Solomon, he's hungry, he's ready, he's going to go see his bride. And his bride was giving the not tonight stance. She had her face washed, she had already eaten, she'd probably relaxed with a book, took a bath, fell asleep, she was out. And this is a typical scene played out over and over throughout the world. We build up in our minds what we are thinking about and what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and then we get to the spot and a totally different thing happens. Frustration comes out of unmet expectations. And the culmination of these things over a period of time begins to build up the conflict. Pastor Mark makes a response about Solomon's response. He agrees with one way he handled it and then disagrees with another way he handled it, though he thinks that the second way he handled it sometimes is necessary. We're going to go a little bit to that next week. So in verse 5, 4-6, "My beloved put his hand on the latch. My heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved. My hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer." We read that she had shut down a sexual desire, but Solomon didn't get angry, react, or blow up. He reached out and touched the latch, communicated basically a love note to the effect, "I know you shut me down, but I love you anyway." So he's frustrated. But he still took the time to say, "I love you." And sometimes we can say the right things, but our heart are in the wrong place. Well, we are trusting that Solomon's heart was in the right place. We're not saying it wasn't. It didn't mean he wasn't frustrated, because we read in the next text that he left. He didn't get ready for bed. He went for a walk. He had one expectation. She had one expectation. Expectations weren't met. Something happened, a conflict. How does his bride respond? She bolts for the door. She can't find him. Again, this is played out all over the world. Both parties are going through these same things all the time, every marriage. And one spouse gets up and starts looking for the other after a frustrating moment. You have one person leaving in the middle of the fight to another room or going for a drive. It's a tense moment, but it's also a tender moment. Even in conflict, the author notes there can be reminders of love. No matter the situation of conflict, loud and aggressive or quiet and sometimes cold, there can be reminders of love. And we can learn to fight fair. We can see what Solomon did next. Number 2, respond. Do not react. Respond. Do not react. Reaction shows a very serious lack of self-control. Looking to build would be a sign of self-control. And I am guilty, personally, of not using self-control. Maybe some of you aren't. I am, and it's learned. It's a learned habit. I'm looking forward to the questions because we're going to try to really break that down in there and what we can and can't do. But Solomon, he was not out of control. His heart may have been full of frustration, and we read him walking out, but he kept himself in control. Whatever he could do to keep himself in control, he needed a breather. That's the right thing to do. But walking out might have been a question. This is what the author questions. In conflict, we have to be very careful not getting caught up in things that get under our skin. There's something more important happening than our offenses, than our unmet expectations. And losing self-control is not what we want. When expectations are not met, something tries to creep in. Pride. And we will go over in our minds what we deserve, what ought to have happened, and all of that in a timely fashion with a joyful heart from the other. Whatever the case of our prideful expectations, this twists reality. So Solomon's bride in the moment was not baiting, provoking, or insulting him. She just communicated she was tired and worn out. When pride kicks in, we have all the reasons of why they should not be this way. The more we are frustrated, the more anger will shape our reactions. And an easy way to become one with Satan is to rehearse and accuse your spouse of all the failures and wrongs they have done. We need to learn to respond without reacting, to stay one with God, then to our spouse. And Solomon responded with an "I love you" expression. Verse 7 says, "The watchmen found me as they went about the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my veil," those watchmen of the walls. Now the woman, she's a queen. She's probably not getting beat up by other people. What's happening is she's probably being emotionally beaten up. Her insides were erect. She'd been running around everywhere. No one has seen Solomon. She's asking everyone. She's torn up and about hurting his feelings. She's sad that she hurt her husband's feelings and rejected him. So 5 verses 8 says, "I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him I'm sick with love." Since she was heartbroken over Solomon, the standoff gave way to a healthier response. She went from being unresponsive and cold toward Solomon toward advancing and searching out for her husband, even professing she was now sick with love. Pastor Matt says, reactions only stoke the fire of conflict. Responses, particularly good ones, help us snuff out the conflict. So we see that Solomon had an expectation, and it doesn't mean he was right in it. We see that the wife had an expectation. Doesn't mean she was right in it. But during those moments, Solomon had to go for a walk. The wife thought about what was actually going on. And then you're going to see in this next one, the next point is going to God. God ends up doing something in it. So this is the third point, going to God. Where Solomon went exactly, we're not sure exactly. But in the moment, we're going to read later on, he went to the garden. We're not sure though. But one thing we do know is it wasn't Solomon who changed his wife's heart. It was God. The problem with us a lot of times is we feel we have to do the dishes, clean the house, make dinner, do everything we can think of. Everything that our husband or wife desires, and we think that'll thwart the conflict, but conflict still arises. And that's not exactly the problem. The problem is now we think we can manipulate the situation into always going right. We're not necessarily doing all the things our spouse desires because it's like out of relationship, which it is, but sometimes there's a manipulation going on in there thinking, well, if I do this, that, and the other, I can avoid conflict altogether. By avoiding conflict and thinking the other person's heart should still be going in the right direction, this is manipulation. And when that doesn't happen, in our manipulation, doing all that we think we should have been done, we have lost expectations that lead to frustrations, then anger, and then manipulation. So we've done A through Z, we've expected one thing, we get frustrated because it doesn't happen, we preempt it in the future, we try to do all these other things, and then it doesn't happen again, and all we were really trying to do is manipulate. Like we were trying to avoid this conflict. And it's not the right thing to do. We're going to see that in a moment. Doing this right, even in healthy marriages, still has things that are going to happen that are wrong in the marriage. With the best practices in any marriage, there will always be little foxes trying to mess things up. Even if your children are raised by the best standards, and even if you live in the best way, in the best neighborhood, with the best amenities, conflict is still going to arise. It's just unavoidable. What would happen in any relationship if we all did what we were supposed to do. So it's like, okay, we're not going to like not do things now. It's that we're all still going to do these things that please our spouse, ultimately first pleasing God, and then we still go to God. Foreseeing conflict will arise and banking that God has a plan before the problem occurs. If married couples could learn, they will never be able to do enough, listen enough, be romantic enough, say sweet enough things, always be in the moment, give all the sex that is desired, give them their alone time, help around the house more, do the honey-do list. Just learning this, that we're never going to be able to make more money, cook the best dinners, wash all the clothes, and anything else you might add to make the experience of life its best. But we would all be in a better spot knowing conflict is still coming, but who is running to Jesus for help in the middle of conflict, the beginning of conflict, or even while doing these things for our spouse? Who's running to Jesus? Who's going to God? So it's important we do the right things, but it's also important that we're going to God, we're going to Jesus. And this is what happened to the queen. She got a heart change from God. And God can use all of those things mentioned, but none of them can change the heart. That is only God's business and His ways and His timing, and only God can do this. Verses 5:10 through 16. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, distinguished among 10,000. His head is the finest gold. His locks are wavy, black as raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water bathed in milk. Sitting beside a pool, his cheeks are like beds of spices, mounts of sweet-smelling herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with jewels. His body is polished ivory, bedecked with sapphires. His legs are alabaster columns set on bases of gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choices as cedars. His mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. I thought this lady was tired. I thought she was going to bed and she didn't want to soil all the stuff and get things dirty. What happened? The bride has went from, I have a headache and I'm tired, to, I want your body. And Solomon did not change her. He wasn't even there. He was outside fighting to live in self-control and love his wife well in frustrations. Well, God went to work on his bride. God stirred her heart again, and she didn't get hard. And sometimes that happens. Maybe more times than not that happens. I know that God has stirred my heart. And rather than respond brokenly, I've hardened myself and gotten more angry. But she responded, and God worked in the deepest parts of her soul. Jesus prompted her towards brokenness and love, and she responded with a yes from deep within. So where do we vaguely read Solomon went? Chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. My beloved is gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to graze in the gardens and gather lilies. I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. He grazes among the lilies. And so Solomon went to the garden, wrestling with his frustration. He probably knew they weren't valid, his frustrations, so he sat alone processing, working through, and praying. This is a typical male trait. Women don't get sad about that. Shutting down is common amongst most males. They process differently than women. Women can access thoughts and feelings more simultaneously, but men need to stew on their thoughts a little more. Now, these aren't always 100%, but this is the generality. When he is shut down or shutting down, it doesn't mean he is not thinking about his bride and the problem. It generally means he's processing. However, getting away from the problem can be an unhealthy thing if it's only for avoidance. So, it's not that we're, let's talk about it later, let's do this later, and then never come back to it. Now, that's not good. But if it's like, okay, I need a breather, and then let's return to this, that's good. None of us can ignore problems away. The conflict will still be there and gone over again and over again and over again until it's settled between both parties. But it is good if you're getting alone to get alone with God and ask Him for help, guidance, and to work on both of you. That God would give you a grace that neither of you deserve, but that both of you need. That you would both respond to the prompting of the Holy Spirit and respond to Him with a yes while responding to your ways with a no. Remember, in the newest or longest of relationships at any level with anyone, it's only God's work to change the heart. My question is, do you trust that tonight? Will you stop reacting and start responding? how will you practically apply what you have learned tonight? So in discussions, I exhort you, I'm excited. Groups discussions are good, they're fun, they've been going good, they've been it's just been very enjoyable to be with you guys. And so I'm looking forward to those in a moment. And just a reminder that in not next week, but the week after, we'll be all gathering together. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all together then. God bless. Lots of love. See you next week for part 2.